Hello and welcome to another Scots Way podcast, and today I'm joined by crime writer Michael J. Malone. Hello Michael.
Hello Alistair, nice to be here.
It's great to have you here, and we're going to talk about your new novel The Torments, which is the sequel to The Murmurs. And I think before we talk about The Torments, it would be good to talk about The Murmurs and how that came about.
That makes sense, aye. Absolutely.
So where did these, because for me this was kind of a shift in your writing, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
It's kind of a new strand.
Absolutely was. I haven't said that. My very first crime novel, the very first version of that, my detective Ray McBain was psychic.
Right.
In the very first draft of it, and a publisher, he said it was like one of those rave rejections that sometimes authors get, and loved the book, but I didn't like the supernatural aspect of it. So I rewrote it, took it out, and by then he'd moved on, so that publishing house weren't interested in it. But so that took me away from that side of it. So I've always been very interested in the supernatural in fiction. So with the Murmurs, it actually came to me in a kind of dream.
Right.
So you know that way when you wake up in the morning, you just think, oh, another 5 minutes, and you kind of...
Very much so. I had that this morning after this dream.
And you kind of just turn over and query in, and it was just in a flash. I think I was still awake, but I just saw this situation. It was a dining room table, mother and father, two children, about 12, a boy and a girl. There's a woman there that the children have never met, but it turns out she's their aunt. And the girl, so as she watches, her aunt's face kind of changes and flickers and becomes a skull. And then she hears a word in her mind, cancer. And she knows that's why this aunt has come to visit the family. She's been estranged, but she wants to see the children before she dies. And I thought, where did that...
I was going to say, we were on the cheese the night before.
I know, so where in the bejesus did that come from? So, but I kind of jumped out of bed and I wrote that down, and for the next wee while, just a matter of like teasing out, I've got to use this. It's just so different from anything else that I've done. And so then, as I say, it was a matter of like the name Annie Jackson again just appeared. There was no debate, conjuring or whatever. Just she was called Annie Jackson, and that was it. So to work out why this aunt had been estranged from the family, they were living somewhere in my imagination, somewhere up there in the northwest of Scotland, but I couldn't work out where that was at that point. And then to work out why was she getting this premonition, where did that come from? So the Murmurs was a kind of I really had a great time writing the book, actually trying to work all of this out, and it actually that kind of the setting was such a big part of working out the story. I'd written I think about a third of the book, and as I said earlier, it was just in my head it was somewhere in the northwest. I hadn't quite worked out where.
Right. Or
where this curse had come from, the premonitions, why that was happening to Annie. But I knew she needed to know where that came from and who her aunt was and why she was estranged, all that stuff. And then there was a troubled relationship with her mother, so she had to sort of work all of that out. And a friend of mine had been to a place up in Ardnamurchan called Ardtornish Estate, and she just sort of raved about the kind of peace and solitude and all that kind of stuff, and it's an absolutely stunning part of the world. And she said, you should go, if you're looking to take some time out and write, then 3 or 4 days up there, it'll help. So I thought, why not? And the thing is as well, I used to do a lot of skiing back in the 80s and 90s, and I've driven up that road to Annachmore to pass to Fort William. Was it Loch Linnhe?
Yes.
Aye. So, and just before you get to Loch Linnhe, there's the wee Corrin ferry.
Right.
And I'd driven past that so many times, and in my imagination, it become this wee kind of mystical, magical place. I thought, I've got to visit that sometime, and here was my chance, because that's how you get there. So it was a wee kind of bunkhouse type place, and oh man, it was just stunning. Ardnamurchan's just beautiful. And the wildlife, the estate office had a big whiteboard outside it saying, right, here's where you can go and see golden eagles, here's where you can go and see otters. I was in my element. So in the mornings I would write, and in the afternoon I would go for a walk. And it was on one of those walks that a major part of the story kind of came to me. So I spoke to the people in the office. I wanted to go walk because you can go up the side of the loch to Loch Allen. I thought I want something that's more circular rather than just there and back, because the back you just like changing your perspective, just walking the same road actually, but just facing a different way. So I wanted a circular thing. So they told me about this walk. I think it was about a 10-minute drive away, and so basically it was I can't remember the name of it, but it was up over this hill, and you got to the top of the furthest part of the walk, and there was a bench there that looked down into this valley.
Right.
And in this valley there was about 16 ruined houses that had been cleared during the clearances.
Right, okay.
But that had been lost in the records, and it was only found again in the 90s with the forestry workers. So you sit on this bench and you press a wee button and you hear an actor reading a diary from one of the children that was turfed out. So this child, she was in her pre-teens, she ended up in Glasgow, and obviously kind of life changed, blah blah blah. But when eventually she wrote her memoir, and in this memoir she talked about being turfed out of these houses in this little valley. And I thought, oh man, I've got to use this. And again, that crime writer thing is, and that's where I hide the bodies.
Yes.
So that I often say to, when I do creative writing classes, to say to aspiring authors, you've got to go and visit the places you're writing about, because the story is in the landscape and it's in the people, and you won't get that out of book.
That's really interesting. I think that idea, because the sense of place is really strong in it.
Yeah.
And that idea of, I think when you read books that have that strong sense of place, that's very true. You can't just go into Google Maps or whatever it is and say, well, there's the street and there's the street. You know, you really do have to kind of have an idea of the surrounding. That's obviously easier for some places than others.
Oh yeah,
but I think there's no doubt about it.
Aye, absolutely. And also being there in that area helped in terms of when I was working out the historical part of the book, because I was keen to illustrate where the curse came from. So obviously the clearances kind of had to play a part in that. And then, like a century earlier, it was the witch hunts. And obviously, given the supernatural aspect of the book, then that was clearly going to have to be a thread as to where this curse came from. So I really enjoyed writing that aspect of it. And
were they, because in that space, the kind of history of witch trials and stuff is quite strong, is that right?
I think not so much in that part of the world, but I think it infected the whole of the UK.
Yeah.
In Scotland, we were pretty kind of hard on that kind of aspect. It's kind of, I don't know whether it's that Calvinistic kind of thing. We've got to do these things. If that was what the law is saying we do it kind of thing.
Yeah.
And obviously it was James the Sixth, his demonology that informed a lot of the witch hunts. I don't know if you're aware of that kind of aspect.
Well, there's been quite a few books written fairly recently that I thought they were kind of maybe not quite northeast, but kind of east. There was a lot of the witch trials and persecution going on.
Yeah, I say it happened all over the place, and I thought, well, this part of the world's not going to avoid it. It's going to have happened. So it was feasible. I wasn't aware of any particular witch hunts in that area, but it had to have happened because it was going on everywhere. And I think the more famous ones are kind of on the East Coast and down in the borders. So yeah, it was and when you read about some of this stuff and how these people were treated, you just think, what were you thinking? It's just it's nasty beyond any kind of comprehension. The whole that. And I discovered that a lot of the witches, they were strangled before they were burned. So I just can't imagine actually putting your hands around somebody's neck to do that. It's such a personal way to kill someone, isn't it? It was staggering, and I thought again, it's kind of you're using these aspects without being exploitative, if you know if that makes sense. It's kind of like demonstrating how horrible, how horrific it is, but not kind of trying to do it in a way that's kind of prurient.
That's interesting hearing you say that as a crime writer, because kind of you have to deal with the more nauseating parts of human kind of traits, human life, if you like. And is that something you're very aware of, that there's a responsibility that comes when you're writing about anything, but particularly writing about crime, I guess?
Oh, definitely. And I think it's with an eye to the experience of victims. It's have to respect that these things do happen, but there are people out there who are probably going through something similar right now, and it's that kind of doing it with respect. And again, it's demonstrating how difficult, how awful it can be, without just being kind of doing it cheap and nasty. And so yeah, I'm keen to do anything like this with some kind of respect to the people who are experiencing it. A good example might be where there was one of the books I wrote, and again it was kind of supernatural, House of Spines, and it was about a young guy who inherits a house from a side of the family he didn't know exists, and in the house he finds a lift, and in the lift he sees the face of a young woman who kind of visits him from time to time. And it's that kind of, I was trying to suggest, is this his delusion or is it a ghost? And I left that up to the reader to decide in the final analysis. But I realised the guy was suffering from some kind of bipolar condition. And then when I made that decision, I thought, right, I need to research this. I do not want to exploit this condition for entertainment.
Yeah.
It needs to be as true to that kind of condition as it possibly can, and do it with respect, and do it in a way that someone who reads the book, who suffers from it, is not going to feel like kind of almost abused by reading that experience. I'd rather they were felt validated, think, oh, somebody else is going through that as well.
Yeah. And did you think with these books in particular, but maybe also the ones you've mentioned, that kind of, is it psychological, is it supernatural? There's a tradition of that in Scottish writing, definitely.
Aye. To be honest, my education when it comes to Scottish writing is lamentable.
So was mine till I went to university, so you know.
Right, and I've spoke about this to other friends before, because I remember as a kid at school, so I was in the school in the 60s and the 70s, and the education in terms of Scottish writing was like non-existent. You got Robert Burns in January, and that was it. And all the other sort of, and I was a very keen reader from a very young age, and all I got was the English war poets, Shakespeare. So English was fine, Scottish, we don't care. And that kind of feeds through into your psyche. So I remember getting into bookshops and walking past the Scottish section as if it was just of no interest. It was like second rate, why should I even bother? And it wasn't a sort of conscious decision it was just like that was the impression from my education. Yeah. So I just walked past it. It was only when I started writing and sought out some Scottish poets that I realised, actually, you know what, we're good at this shit.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that was the case for Scottish culture more generally. You know, you got it at New Year's Eve with a kind of lucky, the White Heather Club, and you got it Burns if you were lucky. And then otherwise, it just, you weren't introduced to it. So you were, there was, I think you're right, Mike, I'm the same, or I was the same, that was certainly the case. So it wasn't deliberate that this was in some kind of Scottish Gothic tradition, but it certainly does seem to fit into that.
And that's hugely pleasing actually, because I don't have a grounding in that, and so where that influence came from, I have no idea. So things filter through anyway, don't they? You don't understand that at the time, but so that's quite gratifying to hear.
And I do wonder if it's other areas of storytelling, whether it's word of mouth, whether it's spooky stories or whatever. You know, Scotland's always had that kind of kind of sense of Halloween, since we're near that time of year about it. And so in terms of the characters in the Murmurs, we should maybe explain just what the Murmurs are so people have an idea without spoiling anything.
So Annie is part of this premonition of people dying. She hears these kind of, I describe it as like a clamour of voices in her mind, which as part of family legend, have driven several of the women in her family mad. So her aunt, she finds out an aunt was hospitalised as a young girl, or sort of a young woman, and it was the Murmurs that kind of drove her mad. And same with her great grandmother. So there is that sort of the legend, according to the book, is that it hits the female of the family line. So there's like, sometimes it misses a generation, sometimes it's consistently in that next generation. So Annie is she's driven to the point of madness by these voices. So the only way she can help herself is to find out the source of it, and then she thinks, maybe I'll learn how to deal with this. I do not want, who wants to end up in a hospital on drugs. So she was driven very much to, and I quite like that aspect of her, as her character is she's not going to play the victim.
Yeah.
She's going to take agency in this situation and find out, what the hell is this and how can I deal with it, and I'm not going to hide from it. And I think, as perhaps that's from my work as a therapist, I can see that that's the way that people kind of need to be to help themselves. And it's this whole thing about safe spaces that's kind of come out in modern sort of parlance. It's not good. It's not wise. Life is not set up to help you in safe spaces. There's avoidance is not the way through these things. Need to face them.
I think what's really interesting, and I didn't realise that before we started speaking about your background, is that for Annie, it's not other people saying, "Oh, she's mad," or "This is supernatural." She's having that conflict within herself. She's not sure what's going on, whether this is something to do with a kind of inherited genetic thing, or whether this is a supernatural thing.
Aye. So that there are people who experience these kind of things without any kind of supernatural interference, because the human brain is capable of all kinds of strange and wonderful treatments. And
so let's move on to the Torments. So, well, before we do, actually, I want to talk about the relationship with her brother Lewis,
right?
Because they're very close.
Aye.
But how does he initially deal with Annie's murmurs?
Well, that's again the dilemma I set up for him, is that when they were shortly after this situation where Annie meets the aunt, you find out that her mother dies in a car crash, and then her father commits suicide, or dies by suicide. I think that's the way we like to say it now. So Lewis, the father makes Lewis promise the day before he's found dead that he looks after Annie. So he's a 13-year-old boy, and he's been given this kind of burden from his father, and then the father dies, so it becomes almost like the law. You have to look after your sister. So that's a sense of responsibility that often parents pass on to their children, isn't it? Particularly boys, I would guess. You've got to be the man, all that nonsense. So for Lewis, he's the twins as well.
Yeah.
So I have to say here that I am a twin.
Oh, right.
I've got a twin sister. Our relationship is nothing like Annie and Lewis. So Lewis has this thing where he's got to look after her, and then when she's going through this experience, he just feels utterly helpless.
Yeah.
So, and again, it's that kind of dynamic that I enjoy playing with. It's that whole thing about, I say to creative writing students, is you get your characters up a tree, then you throw sticks at them. You just make life as difficult for them as you possibly can. So that creates a good deal of tension. And similarly, as the story unfolds, it's Annie's determination to face this, and she wants to do it on her own, and she hates Lewis's kind of she might see it as overbearing kind of protection at some points. So again, that's an interesting tension that I like to play with,
and it's one which carries through to the new book as well. It's in because the idea of twins in itself, I just presumed, you were playing into the almost literary trope that there's a psychological, link between twins going on there.
Suppose if they were identical, that might be the case, but they're not. They're what is known as fraternal twins, obviously if they're different sex. I just wanted a close relationship without that kind of stuff, because that might have been just too easy.
Yeah.
And also, I was playing with supernatural in the sense that I wanted just more of a hint of it rather than an out and out. So I think that aspect of the curse is enough. If I also had the twins having a psychic link or something, then that would maybe mean too much.
Yeah. Well, actually, it moves against that because they don't have that, which is kind of turns expectations on its heads. So let's move on to the Torments, and this time Annie has got, due to what happened in the Murmurs, kind of fame or infamy, perhaps. She's known and recognisable and all of those things, and she's having to deal with that from the beginning. How did you want to move the story on, and why, did you want to write a sequel to it?
I think over my first first five books published were in a kind of loose series, and then I wrote a number of standalones, and each time I write a standalone, I'm always thinking, is this returnable? Can I come back to these characters? Is there unfinished business? And most of the time there's not, because I put my characters through the ringer on every occasion. But with Annie and Lewis, I thought there's mileage here. I enjoyed spending time with them, and I thought I would like to see myself what happens next. So Annie's back. In the Murmurs, she gets left a little cottage near where all these ruins are, and she finds that when she's in the cottage, her Murmurs are not quite as bad. So there's something about the stone that's protective. And so she hides out in this cottage. She gets a wee job locally because you need to engage with other people. I think one thing that we learned from the lockdowns is that we are social creatures. We need that interaction. So I get her a wee job in the local cafe, and then when she's there, she gets another premonition of there's a young man who works with the local lifeboat crew, and he's going to die. This comes to pass. The people in the village know who she is and know what gift she has, and they're angry with her for not warning this young man. But she did try, and he just laughed it off, kind of thing. Or they all did. So she's in that kind of, and again, that's that thing I like to play with, is like she's got this curse. She could help people, but people won't listen. I mean, who would? If someone said to you, by the way, you're going to die in a car crash tomorrow, you would die, away you go, give me peace. So again, that's that whole thing about creating tension in Annie's life. So this happens, and the locals kind of hit out at Annie, and at this point, her aunt comes to her because her son has disappeared. So he's a young man who a bit of a troubled past, but he's kind of got his act together. He's got a young boy, and that's kind of made him grow up. So for him to vanish is really sort of uncharacteristic of the new version of him. So this aunt wants Annie to try and find out what's happened to him. So in the course of trying to find that out, she has to obviously leave her wee cottage, but she comes to the attention of this black magic cult who are intent on raising a Scottish legend, and they think Annie could be a key part of the ceremony to make that happen, which would mean draining her of her blood.
So I'm fascinated by the because this isn't just a group of locals that have got together. This is a big, far-reaching cult that has kind of built over years, and people are brought into it at a young age. And I was fascinated what might be the inspiration.
Again,
it just came to you.
It just came to me. It was kind of like in the first draft, actually, the editorial process for this was torturous. So in the first draft, I really went for it in terms of like horror. So the Highland legend I talk about is called the Bavanshi, and I might be wrong about this, but it's kind of when I found this creature, I thought I've got to. This is fascinating. So as the legend goes, it was for like lonely men out in the fields. They could summon this fairy creature, and if they were able to, or they remembered to say the Lord's Prayer first, they would have a night of fun and get their jollies. If they forgot that part of it, she would turn up, rip their throat out and drink their blood. So it's kind of that old kind of Calvinistic, be careful what you wish for kind of thing, isn't it? So in the first draft, I had the Bavanshi actually in existence. And I also had the werewolves. So the vampire and the werewolves. And my publisher phoned me after I'd submitted the manuscript, and after she'd read it, and she went, "Michael, we need to rein this in a wee bit." So what do you mean? So she said, in the first book with the supernatural, there's a hint of it, and you're given real life kind of explanations for it as well. But with this one, it's like an episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Full Hammer House of Horror.
Aye, she says you need to rein it in, because like the readers that you've taken with you from the crime world, they would happy to go with the first version, the Murmurs, but this is too much. You're going to lose a lot of readers from it. And I kind of had such fun writing that version, and then I realised she's absolutely right.
Yeah.
So instead of the Bavanshi being in existence, it became they want to raise this legend and bring it to life. So
for their own gain as well.
Yes,
which again is a believable side of things.
So that again, what I wanted to explore was that kind of indoctrination kind of thing. So I show the kind of key man and women in that organisation. I see them I show them as kids going to a private school and being kind of groomed essentially into this the order as I call it. And I had a lot of fun writing that as well, actually, just kind of getting into that mindset of how young minds can be moulded into such kind of nefarious schemes.
It's really interesting to pitch those two against Lewis and Annie, because they've both kind of known each other since they were young, and the kind of importance of influence. That idea about raising a child in community. Well, there's two very different ways of raising these children.
Oh, absolutely. One with good intent and one with evil, genuine
evil intent from the start.
Absolutely.
They're both very charismatic characters, and you always feel that they're that their story to the side is one that you would like to kind of learn more about as well. So the editorial process, it wasn't a case of change that. It was almost, you've got to change this fundamentally.
Yes, it was, and it meant a complete rewrite, which was a nightmare. So again, I had to go back and work out who Sylvia and Ben are the two young children that we meet who get indoctrinated into this cult. So I wanted to sort of, rather than just say, right, here you go, here's Sylvia and Ben, and then they're nasty, thought, no, we need to see them as vulnerable children.
Explain why they are as they are.
Aye, and then as a reader, you're kind of conflicted because you're kind of on side, but you're kind of like thinking, oh man, they're nasty. So there's that. I liked playing with that with people as well. And yeah, that was I wanted to show that progression of young and innocent, but are you really? There's also earlier influences from Sylvia's point of view, because her grandmother has been kind of playing with her mind from a very young age, and she gets her into doing seances and all that kind of stuff. It was great fun writing that, by the way.
There is that sense of supernatural in both books. They're kind of creepy. There's definitely crime, but do you think of them as crime horror, or do you even have to put them into brackets such as that?
Well, I guess bookshops and readers and publishers like the brackets,
Yes,
don't they?
they do, yeah.
And I'm not so much of a fan of that.
No.
I remember reading, as I say, I've always been a reader. I can't remember a time when I've not had a book in my hand or a book to hand. And I just read whatever I liked, and I never really thought in terms of genre until my first book was published.
Yeah.
And then I thought, oh, I've written a crime novel, which was interesting. And it was only then that I started to read a lot more crime fiction.
Yeah.
Because I before that book was published, I kind of didn't think I had the chops to plot a crime novel. And my first couple of attempts were what I thought of as just contemporary dramas, which then were eventually published and slightly rewritten to suit the genre. So yeah, it's not a thing I can pay much attention to, but it's kind of necessary in terms of marketing terms, because people like to know what they're about to jump into, don't they?
Yeah. It's that thing about finding a space for them in the bookshop, which is because I think we'll talk maybe about crime writing today a bit later on, because I think it has, for me as a reader, it has kind of changed and become wider. But there is the kind of storytelling. I think you referenced Sonny Bean, do you?
Yes, I do.
So, now for those that don't know, Sonny Bean was a kind of cannibal on the West Coast.
Yes, so South Ayrshire, there is again, in terms of setting, that became important, and I thought, this is only the 14 published novels. This is only the second one that I've set in Ayrshire, which is where I'm from, which might seem a bit weird. But so I thought, I need to actually do something local. And once I'd thought that, then I was thinking through the folklore aspects of the Murmurs, and I thought, well, I need something like that for the Torments. And what happens locally? And the Sonny Bean thing was the first thing that came to me. So down the coast from Ayr and beyond Girvan, just before you get to Ballantrae, actually, there is a cave. Well, there's two caves, but the kind of infamous one is the one for Sonny Bean, and it's something I'd heard referenced over the years, but never really knew too much about it. And I think kids that live down in the Girvan Ballantrae area all know about this legend. So as the history goes, there Sonny Bean and his wife, who was charmingly called Black Alice, they lived in the kind of the Lothians area and were up to all kinds of stuff. And I think had the law caught up with them, they would have been executed. So they had to vanish. So they found themselves, as the legend goes, on the west coast, and in this cave. And the cave is actually one where, when the tide's in, it's inaccessible. So there are kind of periods of safety in that regard. And for the next 30 years, again, as the legend goes, they had 17 children, and their 17 children between them had several grandchildren. So a wee bit of incest going on there. And the clan would prey on passers-by. So they would steal their belongings and store their limbs and kind of have a wee snack. So eventually the law caught up with them. What happened was a couple were passing through on horseback. They attacked this couple. The man had a sword. He managed to fight them off, but they got his wife. So he rode to the nearest town, reported what had happened, and because up to this point they'd completely got away with it. There was body parts washed up on the coast and put down to sort of wild animals. So when the authorities heard what happened, the king sent a dragoon across to Ayrshire to round them up. So they were everyone was captured, taken across to Edinburgh, and they weren't even tried. They were just simply, the men were castrated, their hands and feet cut off, and when they bled to death, they were thrown on a fire, and then the women were strangled and they were thrown on the fire. Now there is no record of this at all. So the thinking now is that the first time this appeared was in an English chapbook. So now we're thinking that perhaps this was one of those things where I think it was the early 1800s it first appeared.
Right.
It was like, look at these horrible Scottish people. This is what they're up to. It was that
propaganda.
It was anti-Scottish propaganda. So it's not true. But the legend's there, and it's we love the gruesome, don't we?
Well, it goes into that idea we mentioned earlier on of the Scottish supernatural storytelling, word of mouth. Now that sounds like it's more organised and, with an agenda. But, right across Scotland, everywhere has it. But there is this rich tradition of word of mouth storytelling, that feeds in, and every area has it, as you were saying. Everyone in that part of Ayrshire knows the story, whereas other people may not.
Yeah, so when I was thinking about my cult leaders, I'm thinking they would expect that this cave would have some kind of dark energy that they could then use for their ceremonies. So that's how I kind of tied that in.
Was there any inspiration that came from other kind of art forms, such as film or things like that?
Very possibly, but I can't sort of pinpoint anything. Yeah. I think we're all kind of sponges, aren't we?
Yeah.
And without pinpointing that it came from there or it came from that, I just think we just soak everything up, and then it kind of filters out through your own creativity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, the only thing when I was reading it, and the idea of bringing up children with the express situation of creating evil and gaining power, I was thinking The Omen when I first saw The Omen kind of thing. But I guess that's another thing. Readers will read into all of your books things that you might think, oh no, I wasn't thinking that.
Oh, absolutely.
I guess at book readings people say that all the time.
I love it when people do that, actually, and they say, like, that's where that came from, and I'm like, oh wow. And even like with, I mentioned House of Spines earlier, there was, oh god, what was that? Oh, Daphne du Maurier. Somebody commented this was kind of like a kind of homage to Daphne du Maurier.
Right.
I haven't read Daphne or seen, and I even gave a character named Mrs. Winter.
Right.
And it was only when this person commented on it, I thought, oh my god, so I have.
Yeah.
I thought, where'd that come from? So, yeah.
And so I was going to talk to you about why you decided to write crime, but it sounds as though crime almost picked you.
Aye, and again, the that very first book that got published, that came to me in a dream as well. So, and that one, I guess I said, I had two first books under the bed kind of thing. So, one of them was about a boy who had a massive family secret that was, and his brother disappeared. He had to find out what happened to his brother. So again, there's kind of a wee crime going on there. The second one was about a man who was the victim of domestic violence. I was quite I've researched the subject for decades, actually, and it became quite apparent to me that male victims of these kind of things are kind of pushed to the side and ignored, and I thought that's not fair. Anyway, and then this third book became my first published novel, and as I say, that came to me in a dream. And what happened there was I dreamt. Again, I woke up and I remembered the dream where I'd written a book, but I couldn't remember much of the plot apart from one aspect of it, and that was where there was a man naked from the naked chest in front of a stage mirror, no one with the lights round about it, and he picks up a scalpel and a white mask. He puts the white mask over his face, and with the scalpel he nicks a lower eyelid, and then presses the mask to that, so there's a tear of blood dripping down the white of the mask. And I thought, I've got to use that. That's so striking as an image. So I wrote that out. I couldn't work out what to do with it at first. I wrote a short story, I wrote a poem, and it just wasn't working.
Right.
And then it's that whole kind of what if thing. Again, when I'm teaching creative writing, that's the driver for plot, is like, what if? And so with this one, I thought, what if this was someone had just killed someone, and this was a wee ceremony they went through after doing it. And then I thought, right, well, if I've got a killer, I need a cop. So then this character appeared on Ray McBain, Detective Ray McBain, but appeared on the page like just from, I have no idea, just fully formed. He was there.
The name again just
Aye,
yeah.
aye, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. So, and again, I didn't really. He became the chief of the prime suspect of this of the death of one of these people, and it was kind of more about somebody who something horrible had happened to, who just happened to be a cop, rather than being a kind of police procedural, which caused me issues in trying to get it published because it didn't fall into that properly onto that stool. So, and I remember when eventually it got published and it came out, I'm thinking, that's a crime novel. And why that was a mystery to me is bizarre, because there's a serial killer and a detective in it. But I say, it was only in retrospect I thought, oh, I've written a crime novel. So yeah, the genre did choose me, and then you're kind of you're in a box, which I'm quite happy to be. I do enjoy the genre and do enjoy writing the books. I sometimes would like to kind of break out of it in a wee bit, but I kind of do anyway. I think some publishers, when I was trying to submit work, I wasn't clearly in that, as I say, in that box. I was kind of going in my own kind of way with it.
Yeah. Because it's interesting you say that the original Torments was almost full horror and that big kind of thing. Because then you think, well, you can maybe push the genre so far, but maybe, I guess that comes again from publishers and what they think, sells, and what you think your audience would want as well. But it does seem to me that Scottish crime fiction in the last 10 more years, there's a diversity in terms of what's been written about than there was maybe previously. That might be my prejudice. I might have thought, okay, it's city, dark, cop, killer, and it's kind of, and the covers all look the same, going back to a certain period of time. Whereas now, there's a lot of historical fiction, particularly when you look at the debut prize lists and the kind of major McIlvanney prize list from Bloody Scotland, which is a good indicator, I think, of just the diversity of what's been written about. Would you think that's right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think it's always been there.
Right.
I think it's we're just paying attention to it more. But there is that tradition of the cop, the loner cop kind of thing, and it works, and people enjoy it.
And a lead law kind of almost.
Yes, aye, and Rebus. So that works. People like it. It's very popular. But yes, I think there's a wide range, and I think that's crime fiction in general. Actually, not just Scottish. I think there's whatever country's producing it. The scope. Somebody always said to me, it's a broad church, and if there's some kind of crime in there, then we'll call it a crime novel.
And do you think there is an affinity in Scotland with crime fiction, or as you say, is that just it's everywhere? It's popular everywhere.
I think it's popular everywhere, but I do think we do like it in this country. Certainly, it's probably the most popular genre in bookshops. If you talk to the booksellers, they'll say, yeah, that's what people are reading a lot of. And I think the beauty of it is that broad church. There's just so much scope within the genre that you can please most readers. There's some that tend more to the literary, if we can use that word. There's some that are very highly commercial. There's some that it's a cat that's doing the investigations. Some are serial killers, some are cops, some are just ordinary people caught up in like dreadful situations. So that kind of broad scope, I think, brings in a lot of readers, and you get some people. It's like Ian Rankin, Val McDermott, who are Chris Brookmeyer, who are hugely successful. Denise Mina, and that success breeds success, and publishers want more, readers want more, and it just kind of builds on that.
It's interesting. The latest Chris Brookmeyer, it's almost blending genres as well. It's definitely crime, but is there other stuff going on?
Well, I've not actually read it yet, but I do know Chris is particularly proud of that book. And rightly so.
And absolutely. I guess it is a balance about what people expect from writers, and actually you as a writer yourself wanting to try
Yeah.
to try something new.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of so admire people like Ian Rankin that can write with the same characters for, I mean, how many years has that been now? And that, keeping it fresh for that long, that's just so impressive. I don't think I could do that. So I'm continuously looking for new characters, new ideas, because that keeps my mind fresh.
Yeah.
In the work. I don't think I could pull off a 30-year career with the one character.
With that in mind, though, do you think are there going to be more Annie Jackson?
There is, yes. That's it. So I'm presently writing the follow-up, and it's called The Howling.
Oh, brilliant!
Right, so
so are the werewolves back?
The werewolf is back, but it's not as a werewolf as you will have ever experienced it.
I can imagine, absolutely. Well, I'm really pleased to see this because I absolutely loved the first two. I think they're terrific. I'm going back to the idea of the kind of crime writing community, because it does seem like a community. There does seem to be, I mean, Bloody Scotland's just one example, but there's a support network. It seems to me, that might be naive. How do you view it?
Oh no, there definitely is, and it's something I've enjoyed from the very first day that I was published. So my first book came out in 2012, which was, I think, the first year of Bloody Scotland.
Right.
And I went to a bunch of festivals in those early days. Went to Harrogate Crime Fiction Festival, Edinburgh Book Festival. There's one down in Bristol, Crime Fest, and there was my favourite wee bookshop up in Granton-on-Spey, called the Bookmark. Marjorie there, she set up a wee crime festival as well. So you often came across like the same people, and you'd have a good chat at the bar, a few drinks, get to know everyone, and it is very collegiate, and we're all there having fun, working hard, and it's quite nice. So there's people there that share the same kind of experiences and frustrations of working in a job that most of us get ignored by the media and the press and the big prizes. So, and consequently trying to make a living at it's quite tricky.
Sure.
Without doing the kind of woe is me thing. But yeah, so we kind of can share our experiences and frustrations, and that helps absolutely. And you do support one another, and you do build up a wee gang that you kind of, oh man, wait to hear what happened now.
But I think it's also really interesting that the writers who are often writing about the most terrible things seem to be really nice, well-rounded people.
I know, it's interesting that, isn't it? I remember William McIlvanney saying that when he'd been to sort of more literary events, again, I hate using that word, but it is what we reckon, what we use. Anyway, so he said at one point, whenever he went to anything like that, there was these writers walking about with knives sticking out the back. But when he went to a crime fiction festival, everybody was just like having fun and having a laugh. And I think it's a different kind of competition in the genre. I think we just appreciate that we're here, we're trying to make a living, we're trying to entertain, but chiefly we're about giving readers what they want. Whereas maybe the more rarefied atmosphere of literature, if we can say it like that, can all be about ego. Actually, and there are obviously there's egos in this genre as well, but it's less of an issue. Yeah,
it does seem to me that people, I've spoken to quite a few panels together, or prize, people who are on the kind of shortlists for prizes, and they genuinely seem to want to work together to kind of do events together, and I'm delighted for whoever might be the winner now. And I think that's quite, it is an interesting aspect.
Aye. Sometimes I wish it was shared out a bit more. Can I get a wee shot? But yes, I'm genuinely pleased for someone else that does well. It's nice to see. Yeah,
because I think it brings people to the genre as well. That's the thing.
Aye, I mean, you go to these again. The readers build up friendships as well, and they go to these things, and they build up a wee gang too, and they can. And again, it's kind of we're all in the same bar, probably having a chat. So you'll have one of the big names kind of in one corner chatting away to somebody, and then there'll be a bunch of readers, and then there'll be another writer, and then there'll be publishers, and it just becomes a bit of a melting pot, and everybody's just getting on and having a blather.
Do you ever get, because I'm imagining some of the crime fiction fans are quite obsessive in terms of, oh, in this novel that person did that, but in that one they did, have you ever had any of that kind of people, questioning timelines or questioning?
Well, not so much that, because my editor is quite good at picking up that stuff, and again with the Torments, the editorial process was tortuous because I had to rewrite the whole thing, and there was elements that stayed and elements that left and had to get cut, and then trying to make sense of all that, and then writing a new storyline, and it was almost like a novel within a novel. So trying to bring that all together was a bit of a mess. And so I've got a good editor that kind of kept me straight there. But yeah, readers do like to kind of catch you out, actually. And the thing is, especially when it comes to police procedural, because there is a certain expectation, and there's the rules that you have to work to, because it's like the police. And readers are incredibly knowledgeable about all that stuff. So if you get that wrong, they will tell you. So I learned that my first book, Blood Tears, I used the word autopsy instead of post-mortem, and I got taken to task for that. So it was someone, her father was a policeman, and she said, as a daughter of a respectful cop, I'm quite disturbed that you used an Americanism. It should have been post-mortem. And I remember I had a blather with Ian Rankin years later, and he was going, oh man, that's nonsense. The two terms now have become interchangeable. So the Americanisms have kind of bled into our culture, and it's probably through TV. So who cares? But yeah, people, they can be quite pedantic, and you better get it right. If you don't, they'll tell you.
And you mentioned your work as a therapist, and also that you teach crime writing. So I guess these feed into the novels as well. I guess all of your aspects of your life do.
Well, of course I do, yeah. So in terms of, I mentioned earlier about being respectful to people who'd experienced some of the stuff that I write about. And I guess that comes from my therapeutic work. That said, I will never, ever use anyone that I've dealt with or have treated. I'll never use their story in a book.
No.
That said, the emotion, the difficulty, the trauma that they experienced, I will use that. And having learned about that aspect of it, I think it helps me kind of flesh out my bad guys a bit more. So they're not just bad guys, they're people who...
There's reasons.
Aye. And things don't happen in a vacuum.
No.
People don't just... As much as we like to sort of put it down to they're just evil or they're just wrong, they're not. There's something has happened to make them like that. And in research in that kind of area, and how trauma affects the developing psyche of children, you can then sort of understand, right, that heinous behaviour has come from somewhere. And I think as a society we need to face up to that. At the moment it's just too easy to write it off. It's like, oh, that's just toxic masculinity or any
knee-jerk reaction to
any
things.
kind of bollocks that they come up with. So yeah, we need to face up to that stuff.
Michael, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me.
It's been a pleasure.
It really has been a pleasure. As I say, a fan of your work anyway, but the Murmurs and the Torments, really took me by surprise, I think, and took me somewhere else entirely, so I can't wait for the next one.
I just need to get it written.
Well, thanks for coming along, and we'll be back soon with someone completely different.